moments before the end of free practice.
Throughout this weekend, it's the battle for pole at the United States Grand Prix with Martin Brundle and James Allen.
Thank you very much, Jim. Good afternoon, everybody. Well, now you can see for yourself, pole position time predicted 1:10.315, a pretty low time. Last year's pole position 1:11.7. The qualifying hour then for the penultimate Grand Prix of the year. Huge crowd here at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. As you can see for yourselves, expecting about 180,000 people here tomorrow. Comfortably the biggest crowd of the year. So enthusiastic, they wear their caps and their badges. They really buy into the concept of Formula One once a year when it makes its visit to Indiana. Already in practice, though, we've seen some interesting performances. 3 cars inside last year's pole position time. The 2 Ferraris, as you would expect, Michael Schumacher ahead of Rubens Barrichello. But Eddie Irvine, 3rd for Jaguar. And that means 2.5 seconds. He's 2.5 seconds faster than he was here last year in the Jaguar. A tremendous leap of performance. But looking at the Williams team there, Martin, in the garage, their performance this morning only a 10th quicker than they managed in qualifying last year. Obviously, Ferrari are saying that they expect Williams to find a bit more this afternoon, but it must be a little bit worrying for Williams that they haven't yet hooked the car up.
Yes, they haven't shown the speed you would have expected, and Ralf Schumacher's been swapping ends and spinning off the track quite frequently too. A few dramas. Montoya had an engine problem yesterday, but as we've seen so many times already this season, James, suddenly they hook up a few extra revs from the BMW engine, a set of new Michelins and a totally committed lap from their 2 drivers. And I think Michelin's could be a little bit happier now. The track temperature up to 33 degrees. Watching the cars through free practice, I noticed that, for example, when Coulthard came in the McLaren, the rear tyres on his car were a little bit dusty as he came in the pits, the rubber not really melting and biting the track. Whereas when Schumacher did a long run in the Bridgestone shod Ferrari, the back tyres looking a bit tatty, really. So maybe these higher track temperatures will play into the hands of the Michelin runners this afternoon. But will they be able to catch those super fast Ferraris? And don't know who that's all about there. Some local fans thanking Bernie Ecclestone, Tony, of course, Tony George, who owns the racetrack here at Indianapolis, and everybody for turning up. David Coulthard talking to a guy called PJ.
Yes, certainly the Americans buying in big time. Look at how much the track temperature has gone up, though. Just in the last 15 minutes or so, it's gone up from about 28 degrees to 33 degrees. And that really is very significant. Now, last year, Martin, one of the strange things that happened in the qualifying hour here at Indianapolis was that the track didn't actually get any faster from the beginning of the hour to the end, which is unusual for Grand Prix tracks, isn't it, during the qualifying hour. Normally, the track, as the rubber goes down and etc., people make faster times. But Montoya was pointing out yesterday that didn't happen last year, and one wonders exactly what's going to happen here this year.
It's a very low grip surface, James, and you tend to see the rubber laying on the outside of the racetrack in little pieces rather than being laid down in the traction zones and the braking areas. So I think that's probably why. They certainly had happy hour this morning, running with a damp, misty air, where the engine gets a bigger density of air into it, therefore they put more fuel with it and they get tremendous power. But suddenly the sun has broken through that low cloud, and you can see for yourself the picture out there. It's a very nice day and warming up a treat, and of course at that point then, conversely, you lose horsepower.
1978 world champion Mario Andretti there, always a popular visitor, won the Indy 500 once in his career, wanted very badly to add a second victory but never managed it. And his son Michael, who raced for McLaren a few years ago, 93, in Formula One, he's never achieved victory in the Indy 500. We've got 2 winners of that race in the field here today, though, Jacques Villeneuve and Juan Pablo Montoya. And so plenty of history, plenty of continuity between the American scene and the Formula One scene. Ferrari mechanics there just fine-tuning their preparations. Jarno Trulli, who this morning was 15th fastest, and Martin, the Renault's looking a little bit uncomfortable again this weekend. We're talking yesterday with Jenson Button. The discussion was around the beginning of the season. They were right on the pace of the McLarens in the first few Grand Prix, and since then McLaren have moved forward and Renault seem to have just been treading water, although Trulli's performance in Monza was very spectacular. But nevertheless, in outright performance terms, they do seem to have been treading water a bit, don't they?
Yes, I think treading water is the right expression. They've not moved forward, and the other teams around them have, and it's left them floundering. But they look really difficult to drive through free practice, so often off the road, and certainly not on the pace. So I don't understand what's going on there at Renault. They appear to be able to hook their cars up to certain circuits from time to time, but they don't have a solid performance base there. Montoya explaining to Sir Frank Williams all about the back end of the car sliding around. I'd imagine Louise is down in the pits.
That's right, Martin. I've just met up with Brian Herter, who had his first experience driving a Formula One car earlier this season, driving a Minardi at Donington. Brian, nice to see you at Indianapolis. Are you wishing you were out in one of these cars rather than just stood here watching?
Well, I'm not a very good spectator for sure, but you know, this is the first really Formula One race I've been to properly. The other one was the U.S. Grand Prix 2 years ago, and I just came with some friends and sat in the stands as a fan. So, you know, it's a different world, and I'm really enjoying soaking it in.
We've been seeing some of the young American drivers who are hoping to get to Europe, get into Formula One. Now, I know that you, after driving the Minardi, were very keen to do that yourself. Has that progressed at all?
Well, I mean, it's still ongoing work, discussion with Minardi team as well as a few others, and Minardi has been kind enough to offer me another test coming up towards the end of the season here. I'm going to do a couple more days in one of their cars, and you know, we'll see. I've got my fingers crossed. It's certainly an exciting opportunity, and I'm doing everything I can to try and make it happen.
Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.
So 10 minutes into the qualifying hour, as Ron Dennis chats with his wife, we're still waiting for the first car to come out. Minutes to go in the qualifying hour for the penultimate Grand Prix of the 2002 season. Eddie Irvine, a man with a lot of expectation on his shoulders, third this morning in the free practice. Can he hold station and get third place here this afternoon in qualifying? It was 1, 2, 3, 2 Ferraris and the Jaguar, exactly as they finished on the podium at the last Grand Prix in Monza, and it would be an extraordinary turnaround for Jaguar if they could get that kind of performance in the closing stages of the season. The crowd here at Indianapolis being very patient. They've sat there for 17 minutes waiting to see a Formula One car come out and do some fast lappery. Hopefully we'll see one very soon. A very young fan from Finland there, no doubt, an even younger one alongside him, no doubt cheering on Kimi Räikkönen. Ted, what can you tell us?
James down here with Eddie Jordan. Eddie, we saw Takuma's very spectacular engine blow out a bit earlier. A bit unfortunate shout that.
Well, it is unfortunate because, you know, again, this is a new circuit for him. He hasn't been here before, and he needed every lap he could possibly get. So we're fighting on the back foot a little bit, I'm afraid, particularly with Taku. And it's been that way for some of the races recently. But I'm sure he's a resilient young kid, and he's going to be fine. But Lady Luck hasn't been on his side.
I understand that Honda only brought 4 qualifying spec engines for all 4 Honda drivers, and that means Taku will have the lower spec engine for this session. Is that right?
Well, without giving any secrets away, we did take the engine out of the T car for him to give him his best chance, and that was a higher spec than what was possibly available because of the time, effort in getting engines prepared and brought out here. Also, I suppose, being mindful that they will make sure they have absolutely the best of everything for Suzuka, which is the next race. So the easiest and the best way was to, in order to give him a very, very fair chance, take the engine out of the T car, the spare car that is, and let's hope everything will run fine for him in that one.
Okay, have a good session, Eddie. Thanks very much.
Yes, they take the engine out of the spare car, lock, stock and barrel, with the gearbox, rear suspension, everything included. They just break as fewer fuel and oil lines as they can get away with, and it takes about half an hour to swap it over. But it must be strange. Eddie Jordan, of course, going to Ford for next year. 2 races left then with this Honda partnership. But you've got to assume that they'll keep that partnership strong until the final lap of Suzuka, the final race of the season. But you do wonder if the focus immediately moves to this team, BAR. Jacques Villeneuve then looks like he's about to be the first man to take to the track for this qualifying session, and indeed he is.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? Honda blew up 5 engines during the Belgian Grand Prix weekend, and we've seen them going off during practice sessions since then as well. You get the impression that Honda are turning the wick up on the development program towards the end of this season. There's not much to be achieved in terms of championship positions for either Jordan or BAR now at this stage. Both now find themselves behind Jaguar in the points chase. Jaguar now 6th, Jordan 7th, BAR 8th, and Honda, in search of some major leap forwards for next season, are throwing some serious development at these engines now, and they're blowing up as a result.
Yes, Villeneuve then at 1 minute 12.7 this morning, and that'll be his target to beat. That's his fastest lap of the weekend so far. And let's have a look and see what he can do. This is the reconnaissance lap then, just building up brake temperature. The tyres have reasonable temperature anyway, of course. They've come out of the blankets, but the brakes will be effectively ambient temperature only, some 23 degrees, but very soon they'll be up around the 750 degree mark as he brakes very hard down into turn 1 for the start of his qualifying lap. And you have to put in quite a lot of effort on that out lap to be sure you've got some brake temperature when you get around to start the lap.
Yes, 2 big stops here on the lap at Indianapolis. The biggest one, as Martin was saying, across the start-finish line, going down to turn 1, you're doing 209 miles an hour, braking down to about 65, 70 miles an hour for turn 1. So a huge stop, and they hit the brakes just inside the 100-meter board. Also on the back straight, going down from about 180 miles an hour, again down to about 70 for that very critical and difficult corner that Martin was talking about, turn 8. And we'll see that on Villeneuve's lap. He's got quite a bit of yellowy smoke coming out. Is that the plank at the bottom?
It's the plank.
Touching it's obviously running the car very low to the ground then, as Villeneuve goes across the start-finish line, and this is the braking zone.
It's on the ground, the underneath of the car on the ground at the end of the straight. Villeneuve, as we've seen so often, really likes to run his car low. And I can tell you, it really hurts when the car hits the ground, remembering you're sitting on the floor of the car inside a Grand Prix car. But that's how Villeneuve likes it, bouncing along at the back. And they have to put a new plank on before qualifying, because often the wear rate's so high it would be illegal should the scrutineers measure the car at the end of the session. And Villeneuve then already out of turn 7 on his way down to that tricky turn 8.
This is the turn 8 Martin was talking about, curb on the inside, and very, very slow after that, picking their way through some first gear corners. Really, it's a mix, someone said, this circuit of Monza and Monaco. You've got the flat out sections up on the banking, and then you've got this really, really slow stuff, which the owner of this circuit, Tony George, has promised to change in 2 years' time, but he's not going to spend the money to do it just yet. They're going to have to race on it for a couple more years. Villeneuve then, look how low to the ground that car is as he comes through to be the first man to set a competitive time here at Indianapolis in qualifying, a 1:12.803, and that is a tenth slower than he managed this morning. So back to the drawing board for Jacques Villeneuve.
That's Coulthard then taking to the racetrack. I think we saw Raikkonen leaving the pit garage. Now he's about to leave the pit garage by the looks of it. So both McLarens getting ready. Alex Young out on track, and Montoya and McNish out there too.
Down on the outside of turn 9, Martin, I was having a bit of a wander around the track this morning. There's a large banner of the Alex Young fan club. They've got American flag, a German flag. There's quite a little contingent of them. I don't know if we'll see it on the coverage. I hope we do. But he's definitely got some fans here this weekend. Alan McNish then, we ride on board with him. Flat out, 190 miles an hour, crossing the line at 210. McNish 1:13.004, and that's 2/10 faster than he managed this morning, but Toyota not really on it this weekend.
That's surprising. I thought they'd be good here, but they've had this curious season where they've been off the pace from time to time. For example, Canada, and they just didn't know why, how, or what they could possibly do about it. And I think that's why they got frustrated with their 2 drivers, is my understanding. They've had a few race weekends where they just didn't seem to move forward or understand even how to begin to move forward. But, Toyota then struggling from time to time. This man Montoya has smashed the fastest first sector time of the qualifying session as expected. What can he do? It's got to be deep into the 1:11s, otherwise he's going to be very disappointed.
He did a 1:11.9 this morning, but he looks like he's attacking far more now than he was this morning, running really high up on the racetrack, picking up all the speed he can for the slingshot through the bank corner. Juan Montoya, pole sitter at Monza 2 weeks ago, and he goes fastest with a 1:11.4, and that is 3/10 slower than Michael Schumacher managed this morning. And he's going to have to get down into the 10s, into the low 10s, if he wants to take pole position here this afternoon. Here's David Coulthard, been driving very smoothly all weekend.
He's a 10th down on Montoya's first sector. We're on board looking through Coulthard's steering wheel, and occasionally you can see the view is blocked as he turns the wheel. That's the amount of lock it needs. You can see the green and red lights flashing. That's his dashboard information reflecting off the back of the steering wheel. Coulthard just gently moving his head from side to side to get the balance absolutely right. You're part of the car through there. As the car moves, as the car loads up, so do you, and you lean into it, and now you just try to turn the steering wheel the minimum amount you can so that you don't push the wheel sideways down the track in any way, shape or form to get top speed. He goes second on a 1:11.900, 9 thousandths faster than this morning.
In the pits, watching all this, the reigning world champion, Michael Schumacher, fastest this morning, and everybody looking to him to lead the way this afternoon. Can Williams raise their game and give them a challenge? Just saw a few cars going through the frame there, Martin, and it strikes me that this track, especially those tight sections, traffic is a huge problem here. This morning in the free practice, everyone was stopping and trying to find some space for themselves. Here, look already.
Yes, the Sauber clearing the way nicely. The Williams of Ralf Schumacher, he matched Montoya just about in the first sector. He's lost best part of 0.2 of a second somewhere through the middle part of the lap, but nonetheless I think this will still put him up into second place behind his teammate. Coulthard will then drop down to third. We're waiting for the line to come up. Seems to take forever when that line's approaching, and there he goes, and indeed does slot it into currently second position. The Ferraris are going to smash that, I think, when they come out.
Yes, Ralf last year had the best of the qualifying. He was at this stage of the season, he was 11-5 up against Juan Montoya in qualifying. This season the story completely reversed. It's 8-7 in Montoya's favour, and here's a man who's been really on it all weekend, but this time diving into the pit lane, so obviously not happy.
Yeah, he's had a poor middle sector somewhere. James made a mistake, realised it and aborted the lap. So Irvine then probably over anxious, having had a great run so far, just got out of it and abandoned that particular run. Jenson Button is up into fourth place, but some 1.2 seconds away from pole. This is Kimi Räikkönen. He's been quite fast. He's about 0.4 of a second down, and the final sector then, which is just over 20 seconds to come. And there's not a lot you can do as a driver through here, apart from make sure you don't disturb the car as it's going through the banking. Montoya goes third. Räikkönen, sorry, goes third.
Kimi Räikkönen in the spare car after the accident this morning where he went into the barriers and damaged the front suspension. So that is the car that Sarah Fisher drove yesterday afternoon. Thank goodness she didn't crash it or do anything untoward, because Kimi has had need of it this afternoon. We're riding on board with the Sauber of Nick Heidfeld, 6th fastest this morning, but he too is heading straight for the pits, having just done an outlap. So obviously a problem there it is.
Yes, outbraked himself down into turn one. I imagine he's going to have a little trip across the grass. That is so frustrating when you blow it in the first corner. You've not even really got going on your hot lap and you've already made a mistake. We saw Räikkönen do a similar thing this morning. An instant lockup, which is actually quite hard to do at 200 miles an hour, James. The downforce on the car is massive, and it's just the way you hit the brake pedal. If you're just too violent and you get a little bit of acceleration into the brake pedal itself, suddenly you snatch the brakes, especially if they're not quite up to full operating temperature.
It must be a huge pressure that you have to put onto the brake pedal then.
It is, and it feels as if the pedal's coming through your foot by the end of a Grand Prix at the heavy braking circuits. And it's about 70 bar of pressure, if that means anything to anybody.
Ralf Schumacher back in the pits, currently in second place behind Juan Montoya. We've yet to see Michael Schumacher or Rubens Barrichello, though, setting a competitive time. And Heidfeld, you see the look in his eyes there, certainly pretty upset with himself. Currently then, with just over half an hour of the session still to run, Montoya fastest, Ralf Schumacher second, Räikkönen third, about 0.4 of a second slower than Montoya. Then it's the second McLaren of Coulthard, just behind his teammate. Button fifth, sixth is Jacques Villeneuve, seventh Alan McNish, eighth Pedro de la Rosa in the Jaguar, ninth Takuma Sato in the Jordan. Salo is 10th for Toyota, 11th Young, and ahead at the moment of teammate Mark Webber.
Yes, indeed, on board with Heinz-Harald Frentzen. That is turn 11. The rev counter there on the left-hand side, you can see he's changing gear around 17,900 RPM. The overall lap time at the bottom of the screen, that's done from a a microphone on the car. It's very, very accurate, that rev counter, and Frentzen goes 5th, just behind Coulthard then in 4th. But the two Ferraris are on track.
Yep, we're going to see something now from Michael Schumacher and Rubens Barrichello. Barrichello is 0.3 of a second slower, though, in Sector 1 than Montoya, and here's why, possibly. Yes, the lockup of the right rear, right front.
Yeah, he's drifted very wide, hasn't he? Got away with it, but of course it's really affected his lap. Will he choose to try to learn something about the track, or will he just give up on that? Michael Schumacher then has had a very poor first sector, very poor first sector. Barrichello is absolutely hot through the middle, faster than anybody else, but did he give too much away in that first part?
Well, he's a 10th quicker in the middle sector than Montoya, so it's not going to put him on pole, but it'll certainly get him up there. It's a banker lap for Rubens Barrichello, top 4 probably. In fact, he's 2nd, so he split the two Williamses, but he knows, and we all know, he can go a lot faster than that. Michael Schumacher, though, has obviously made a mistake somewhere on that first sector, because he was 2 seconds slower than Barrichello on Sector 1.
Yes, indeed.
And aborted the lap.
Yes, indeed. We flashed on board a Ferrari. I kind of assumed it was Rubens, it was the replay of Rubens, but it seems as if Michael Schumacher may have made exactly the same mistake.
But paid a heavier price for it. Rubens only lost 0.3. Michael lost 2 full seconds. So Frentzen going up into 6th place, as we saw. Jarno Trulli has done a time just a moment ago, which is good enough for 7th. So he's now ahead of teammate Jenson Button once again, as he has been really throughout the season. Also just recording a time a moment ago, Giancarlo Fisichella for Jordan into the top 10 in 9th place, and also Jacques Villeneuve in 10th.
Panis has stopped out on track somewhere with the BAR in the final sector. Michael Schumacher has not done a time. Eddie Irvine has not done a time, and Heidfeld clearly with a technical problem on his way out of the pits. So 4 drivers not yet in the Grand Prix.
So a familiar picture in some ways, with Juan Montoya currently sitting on provisional pole with 28.5 minutes of the session to go. 7 times this season already Montoya has sat on pole, better than Michael Schumacher has managed, but we all know that the challenge from Ferrari lurks around the corner. Ted, what can you tell us?
Just got an update on Eddie Irvine for you, James. On that first run that we saw he aborted, he came in complaining of very twitchy oversteer in the car. He's just played around with some of the ballast, some of the weights, and a bit of the suspension on that Jaguar. Just gone out right now. Let's see what he can do.
Martin, I'm wondering, the track temperatures have gone up quite a lot. They've obviously got the car dialed in for a track temperature of about 26 degrees. Do you think they've been caught out by the temperature going up by as much as 6 degrees? It's the same for everybody, I know, but I just wonder. Not
enough to have to give up on a lap, James, no. It's a feeling, and it's a preference with that 5-degree window, but it wouldn't absolutely fundamentally change the way the car was running. If it does, you've got a very bad Formula 1 car, and certainly the Jaguar at the moment seems to be a very strong Formula 1 car. Now then, on board with Nick Heidfeld to start his second attempt at a hot lap. The first one didn't work. Let's see if he can brake neatly down into 1. And then he lost the back end of the car. Unfortunately, we cut away just as Heidfeld was desperately trying to save that Sauber in turn 1. He didn't snatch a front brake, but he did save it, look, because we're still going. So then, this is the infield section where you tend to just keep sweeping across the track. Try and get it into the apex, Nick, because it's quicker around there. If you do a wall of death around the outside, you won't get away with it. And here we go. He turns in nicely, but there's obviously a little bump in the middle there that's just kicked the back end out, and he had to counter steer, and that puts you completely offline. Here's a replay of the same action then. Look, it's turning in beautifully, and suddenly, bang, he has to steer left when he's going right.
So many different places on this racetrack, the drivers say, where you can lose time. I mean, they describe it as being the infield as being a little bit Mickey Mouse, but they all also say that the corners are difficult. They do present a challenge to you to get into them well. As Martin was saying, get close to the apex of the corner. Perfection here is very hard to find. And Nick Heidfeld, one of several drivers who so far is some way away from perfection, but he's into the top 10. So not a bad recovery from Heidfeld. We're on board, though, with Eddie Irvine.
Yes, it does seem as if Heidfeld can put a great lap time in, doesn't it? And if he can do that kind of time with such a big mistake down there at 1. And he's gone off again, look. So Heidfeld then off again on the in-lap.
Yep, obviously gone off down at turn 2. Michael Schumacher being pushed back into the garage. I wonder whether he'd stalled his engine on the way out. Certainly he had the tyre covers off. Brand new set on board ready to go out for another run as Heidfeld takes to a back route. And we rejoin Eddie Irvine, currently going faster than he has before, but that's not difficult because he aborted his lap. The prediction is he's going to finish 7th here, at 7th on the grid. We will see into the final turn. The Ford Cosworth engine powering this Jaguar, one of the best in the field, huge amount of horsepower coming out of it, and 6th is his reward. So Jaguars certainly are delivering this afternoon. 12.2 is well, it's 6/10 slower than he went this morning, so the time's not coming through at the moment, are they, Martin?
No, indeed. That's Heidfeld trying turn 1 again on his in-lap and losing it. So finally the back end did get away from him. So quite clearly the balance has changed. That's Montoya desperately trying to hang on to the Williams. So the balance has changed this afternoon. The track has gone to oversteer, and that is a Minardi parked over there in the wall, I'd imagine, on the outside of turn 8. Looked like Alex Young, but Montoya really struggling. He's done a super fast first sector, but lost a half a second in the middle. We saw as he was wrestling the car, giving it an armful of opposite lock. Will he improve on a 1:11.4? It's going to be hard work after those problems, and indeed he does not.
Would have been nice to see the telemetry on that straight, because this is the engine in the back of this BMW Williams that is revving to over 19,000 RPM, as it was at Monza 2 weeks ago and here again this weekend. And they're going to make a decision this afternoon, BMW, whether they run that engine in the race. There's another look at what happened to Alex Young, and that was Montoya right behind him, was it? No, was it Ralf Schumacher?
I think it could well have been Montoya, and that may have compromised him slightly, but it was Young, of course, spinning off in that infamous turn 8. And Ralf Schumacher's on a super hot lap now. He's the fastest of anybody in the first sector, and the yellows are waving, and that is going to compromise his lap. If you put in super fast sectors while you're going through yellow zones, and that spinning Minardi then has cost both Williams a hot lap. But Ralf, you have to just back out of a little bit, but try to keep some momentum. Pretend you've really noticed that yellow flag. Remember what Mika Häkkinen used to do. He used to put his hand out of the cockpit to say, yeah, I've seen it, but keep his foot hard on the throttle pedal.
Good tactic it was too. Got Mika plenty of poles. Ralf Schumacher chose not to use it. His middle sector wasn't particularly competitive. What's he done in the final sector? No, you see he's lost the time. Stays 3rd. And that's Williams. That's 2 runs for both the Williams drivers now.
Schumi's about to put some manners on the lot of them, though. He's got it right in turn 1 this time. And look, he's over 1/3 of a second up already. So this should pop into the 1:10s. Michael Schumacher about to deliver the pace he's been showing all weekend.
But he's been through the same yellow flag zone as Ralf has, and he set his fastest sector time there. So that's interesting. As he drives for the line, Michael Schumacher at Indianapolis gets pole position and first man to dip into the 1:10s with a 1:10.790. Super lap from Michael Schumacher.
On board with Kimi Räikkönen, currently P5. Over the line he goes now and moves up to 4th. So he just pushes Ralf Schumacher out by a fraction. 1:11.6. That's the fastest McLaren time of the weekend.
Yes, finding some speed now then, Kimi Räikkönen. It looked like he was pressing on as well on his in-lap. So, with 22 minutes still to go in the qualifying session, that's the classification of the top 6 provisionally. And you can see the margin for yourself now that Michael Schumacher has put between himself and Juan Montoya, 6/10 of a second.
You can see those 2 yellow dots at the top of the screen in between the time remaining of the qualifying session. That says there's a yellow flag zone out on the track. We've just seen 3 drivers post their fastest times of qualifying, having gone through the yellow flag zone. So the stewards will be watching that very closely.
For those of you who've been enjoying Grand Prix racing with us on ITV for a number of years, think back to 1997, Japanese Grand Prix. Jacques Villeneuve was disqualified from the Grand Prix for doing just that. The penultimate race of the season. He raced under appeal, if you remember. So how times change.
Yes, well, sometimes these rules are applied to suit certain situations, but we've got a little bit more transparency and clarity, I think, these days. But nonetheless, you're right, James. Jacques did pay a heavy penalty for that one. But we'll have to wait and see if the stewards decide that Michael Schumacher, Ralf Schumacher, Kimi Räikkönen really were pushing too hard in the yellow flag zone. It's all about marshal safety. There are men out there trying to recover the car. They're there to help the drivers for the drivers' own security, and you cannot put them at risk.
No, and in fact, we did see from the onboard camera of one of the cars going through during that phase that they actually had the crane on wheels lifting the car of Alex Young up. It was in front of the tyre barrier, so there was a time of maximum danger. There was a very substantial piece of ironmongery right on the place where if you lost it, you crash straight into it.
Coulthard then, currently 6th. This is the out lap. He's about to start his hot lap. Now notice the yellow dots have gone. So the yellow flag zone is no longer in place. Look at that, 18,190 revs. Just over that, I'd imagine, by the time he then hits the brakes for 1. Coulthard running wide in turn 1. He'll just about get away with it, but it was not the optimum line. Let's see how this car brakes down to 70 miles an hour for turn 4. That looked really nice, didn't it? That looked super easy. Now then, 6. Can he keep it inside? A lot of understeer there for David Coulthard. A new front suspension on this car this weekend that was designed to dial out some of that mid-corner understeer. 7 was good, up to 180 miles an hour. Look, it's just a grey mass down there, so you've got to pick a point for 8, and now he's got away with that one very nicely. Hook your wheel on the inside of the curb. Try to use it like a railway line in those 2 hairpins. Remember, Ralf Schumacher spun away the lead of the Grand Prix in one of those hairpins last year. Coulthard staying away from that curb on the inside, which tends to kick the cars across the track, as you saw this morning, James. And now take the line of least resistance around the 9-degree banking as you sweep down. Try to use the slope of the bank to build up speed. Coulthard goes over the line and moves into P3. A good run for Coulthard.
Yes, he's ahead of his teammate Kimi Räikkönen by 0.2 of a second, and that was a great example of David Coulthard's technique and style. Very smooth. As you said, Martin, he missed a couple of apexes by a little bit, but generally speaking, he kept out of trouble. He's a very, very smooth driver. Terrific to watch, and that was a great example of it. Louise, what can you tell us?
Juan Pablo Montoya has still got a few issues with his car. He wasn't at all happy with the handling this morning. He said a massive amount of understeer. He actually set the T car up with a different setup so that if he couldn't improve his race car, he could just jump into the T car, try that one instead. He is sticking with the race car, but he's been changing it throughout this session. Modifications after the first run, and he's just made some more changes before he goes out again.
Thank you for that, Louise. Jacques Villeneuve's moved up to 7th place. This is Barrichello, currently 4th. Goes over the line, up under the front row. So an all-Ferrari front row then. Still a couple of tenths behind teammate Michael Schumacher. They've not got the advantage we expected so far this afternoon. They've had a bit of a scruffy qualifying session so far. Just under 18 minutes remaining. Michael Schumacher, Barrichello, Montoya, Coulthard, Räikkönen, Ralf Schumacher, all inside last year's pole position. That's the relentless pace of Formula One. Montoya takes to the track.
Just under a quarter of an hour to go. Pierre Dupasquier there on the right, just playing with his nose. Looks a lot like Jacques Cousteau, doesn't he? He's the head of Michelin's motorsport division, has been for many, many years, since back in the 80s, when Michelin were the world champion team with McLaren. And a very canny customer, a more wily operator you will not meet in Formula One. Very economical with the truth. Anyway, Kimi Räikkönen is currently on a lap which is not as good as the one he managed before. This is his 3rd run of the afternoon for the McLaren driver. Still, remember, in the spare car after crashing his race car into the barriers. And this isn't going to improve his lot, I don't think, very much.
He's not had a good weekend, Räikkönen. He's looked slightly out of control. We've seen him off the road a lot, and finally in the hedge at the very final part of this morning's free practice. And Räikkönen just struggling a little bit, and that is his slowest time of qualifying. And I can tell you that hurts when you do that. You go out, you do a reasonable first run, go a bit quicker on your second run, and then go slower on your third. Really gives you some pain, as we see McNish out-braking himself down into turn 1. The right front tyre unloaded. My mum has asked that I explain better why front wheels lock up on Formula One cars. It is because the suspension is very stiff as Montoya goes across the same piece of grass, and you have they're connected with the anti-roll bar or torsion bars, and as you begin to turn into the corner, the outside tyre starts to take a lot of load and the inside tyre goes a little bit light. The suspension jacks the car up and it lifts the inside front, and of course that's when it wants to start locking up and smoking the tyre down the road.
Well, we saw Montoya there going onto the grass, and that's bad news for him because he was just beginning his third run of the afternoon. Currently in third place on the grid, and he's lost about 6 seconds in Sector 1 by that mistake. Ralf Schumacher, though, his first sector and his middle sector have not been better than he has gone before, so this is unlikely to be an improvement for him. Currently in 6th place, he stays in 6th place.
It's like you were saying at the beginning of the show, James, they're not going faster, are they? That, again, that's Ralph's slowest run of the qualifying session. I wonder if we're going to see the same tactics we've seen in the past, where they use each other's, the team cars for some slipstreaming, because it's very close, isn't it? Montoya 11.4, Coulthard 11.4, Raikkonen 11.6, Ralf Schumacher 11.6, and there is Montoya getting out of shape, braking too late, trying to turn the wheel and brake at the same time. The tyre says, I can't cope with all of that. I've got to suspend the car, turn the car and slow the car down. Can't do it, mate. We're going off the road.
Now, we're seeing quite a lot of drivers in Turn 1, Martin. We've seen Heidfeld, we've seen very recently in the last few minutes Montoya, and now Eddie Irvine. Has the track changed? Are they pushing a little bit more, just trying to brake 5 metres later, or has the track changed and taken the grip away from them? 1
or 2 metres later, the track hasn't changed, no, but they've got to match it up. If you brake too early, James, you've lost a tenth, and a tenth of a second on today's grid in the zone that you're operating in with your team could be a row or two. There's absolutely no point in taking it cautiously into one. There's no point in driving across the grass on the exit either, but you have to go for it.
Yes, the margins are pretty small. Michael Schumacher has just over 2/10 advantage over Rubens Barrichello. This lap of Barrichello's also is not an improvement on what he's done before. It's not close, really, to the time he set before. He crosses the line in an 11.3. It's 0.3 of a second slower than he went earlier. And I was saying at the top of the hour, last year this track very odd in that it didn't get faster as the hour went on, progressed. Normally the last few minutes of the hour are the fastest time to be on the racetrack. It's not happening here this afternoon, although, having said that, both Villeneuve and Panis, and one of them's getting out of the way of the other, Panis getting out of the way of Villeneuve, they were both on best laps so far, so quite why Panis got out of the way, I'm not sure.
He's probably made a mistake somewhere, but they're the surprise stars of the qualifying so far. 7th for this man Villeneuve, 8th for Panis, despite the problem on this current lap for Panis. So Villeneuve then is on target to improve. Could he knock Ralf Schumacher off with a 1:11.6? No, he can't, but he's getting dangerously close, isn't he?
Yeah, and they're pretty impressed with that down in the BAR garage. A lot of big sponsors here this weekend. It's a big showcase event for British American racing, and certainly this performance in qualifying couldn't come at a better time. Certainly helped by the performance of the upgraded Honda engine. We ride on board, though, with the man who's showing them all the way home this afternoon here in Indiana. It's Michael Schumacher. Look at the engine revving to almost 19,000 RPM, up onto the back straight. Everything happens so quickly in Formula One, and particularly with Michael Schumacher. And he's driving for the line. Can he make an improvement? Very close to the wall on the exit. And he goes through in a 1:10.9, still faster than anybody else has managed, but not as good as he did before.
Yes, that would be fast enough for pole in itself, but as you say, not as fast as he has been. But the track then quite clearly has lost some speed. I can't see any dust and dirt on the track. Nobody's blown up. There's no oil. So curiously, that the track, when it's getting more rubber on it, is giving up grip but not adding grip. That's very strange. Frentzen then, he's 10th at the moment with a 1:12.191, and interestingly just ahead of teammate Heidfeld, who's been driving that car all year. Heidfeld's worst nightmare, James, is that Frentzen, who's much older than him, turns up now or next year. They're going to be teammates next year, both from Mönchengladbach. The old man Frentzen turns up. If he blows his doors off, as Raikkonen did, and Mass has kept Heidfeld pretty honest as well, Heidfeld's going to be over.
Yeah, it's a pretty ruthless business, Formula One. You've got to stand up and be counted. There's nowhere to hide for any of these drivers. And Heinz-Harald Frentzen, who seemed to lose his hunger when he was with Jordan, was fired by the team of the German Grand Prix last year just for lack of motivation, lack of effort, really. The team were frustrated with him. He wasn't doing the business for them. But suddenly he seems to have rediscovered his hunger to race. And it's really terrific to see.
Truly has just come in the Renault and spoiled the BAR party. He's popped the Renault up into 7th place on a 1:11.82. So now it's Michael Schumacher, Barrichello, Montoya, Coulthard, Raikkonen, Ralf Schumacher, Trulli, Villeneuve, Panis and Frentzen in the top 10. But that's just changed as Fisichella pops that Jordan into the top 10.
Yep, Trulli's best qualifying of the season so far was 6th, so he's just 1 place away from that. We've got 7.5 minutes of the hour still to go. A lot of work going on down in the Williams garage from the looks of things. Montoya does tend to change his car a lot during the course of a qualifying hour, doesn't he? He'll play around with all sorts of things with on the car, the wings and the springs and what have you, to try and find extra performance. But he's going to need to find well over half a second if he's going to knock Michael Schumacher off his perch, and he's got 7 minutes in which to do it.
Yes, Michael Schumacher, of course, always been on pole for this Grand Prix, but maybe that's why Montoya doesn't end up with such a good race setup. He plays around with the car and targets the qualifying. He then ends up struggling in the warm-up, I think, and with a race setup itself. Louise is down in the pits.
Yeah, so watching the Williams mechanics working on Montoya's car, you're right, he's still not happy with it. He's told the team that his car is swinging around. I'm not quite sure what that means in technical terms, but I don't think I'd want my car swinging around at 300 kilometres an hour. Next door in the Williams garage, Ralf Schumacher's been making some changes to his front wing. At McLaren garage as well, they've been tweaking their cars as the session's gone on. Not such big changes as we've seen at Williams, just little bits and bobs here and there. If you go right to the other end of the pit lane, sorry, to the top end of the pit lane, to the Ferrari garage, when their cars come in at the end of each run, they just polish them, which is rather a worrying sign for the opposition.
Absolutely, and swinging around, and I think he's talking about oversteer, back end of the car sliding. We saw him go off the track and was manfully fighting that, Williams, as indeed Sato is fighting oversteer there in the Jordan. He's 15th at the moment, Sato. Jaguar then on track. Where are they at the moment? 13th and 17th. This will be a disaster for Jaguar if they end up in those sort of positions. They look like they could easily threaten the top 6.
Yep, Eddie Irvine 3rd fastest this morning, which is usually a pretty good indicator for qualifying, but somehow or other the performance has gone away, and he is 0.7 of a second slower than he was this morning. So not at all what he had in mind. Sam Michael there, Chief Operating Engineer for the Williams team, talking to Ralf Schumacher, shaking his head, obviously aware that next door at Ferrari, all they're doing is getting a bit of polish out, a bit of teacup on the car whilst they're making massive changes. But if you're looking for the British interest tomorrow in the Grand Prix, you've got David Coulthard 4th at the moment. But when you do your grid walk and you're looking for some British drivers, Martin, you're going to have to stroll back to row 7, where you'll find Eddie Irvine alongside Jenson Button, and then on the row behind you'll find Alan McNish. So a bit of a struggle really for the Brits, apart from David Coulthard this afternoon.
Yes, indeed. Well, I just don't understand the Jaguar situation. They're still 0.6 away from their practice run this morning. They were 3rd yesterday as well. They must have been running the car very, very light on fuel or whatever, because when now push comes very much to shove, they haven't delivered.
Indeed they haven't. Just over 4 minutes of the session still to go. Then 2 Ferraris on the front row. Then you've got Montoya and Coulthard on row 2. Row 3 is Raikkonen and Ralf Schumacher. Row 4, Trulli, Villeneuve. Row 5, Fisichella, Panis. So a good day really at the office for Bridgestone, you'd have to say, with both the BARs going well, the Jordans as well. And pretty much as you'd expect with the 2 McLarens, except that David Coulthard really has shown Kimi Raikkonen the way home this weekend, which is very good. He's looked tidier and more composed out on the racetrack, and Coulthard having a good weekend.
No doubt about it, but the Jaguars have run out of laps. So De La Rosa in 17th and Irvine currently in 13th do not have enough laps, any further laps available to them. Irvine hasn't used all 12. Panis off the road again, then that's 2 trashed runs for him. And does he have enough laps for another run? He's 10th at the moment, and what is he? He's gesticulating to somebody. Maybe he's talking on the radio, and sometimes you do that in the car. You start using your hands, thinking that the guy you're talking to a couple of miles away from you can see you.
Yeah, a real daisy cutter there for Olivier Panis. His last 2 runs been very much compromised, but he was right with Villeneuve.
Curious spin, that was a very curious spin. It was kind of in the middle of the corner, and it took a big left. Very strange.
And Villeneuve has improved, so really the only man who's finding speed at the moment is Jacques Villeneuve. He's not able to improve his position, but he's just over a tenth of a second behind Ralf Schumacher, and he can't find that little bit that he needs to unseat the Williams. But nevertheless, he's been improving steadily throughout the hour in 7th position. Also improving Mark Webber, who's now got ahead not only of his teammate Alex Young, but also of Mika Salo as well. So Webber up to 18th.
Young spun off, but he's still comfortably in the race. It's a 1:15.7 is the 107% time, and he's done a 1:13.8, and a solid run for Young this afternoon. Nick Heidfeld then is about to improve on his 12th place. He could go as high as 8th or 9th if he's had a really good final sector. Over the line he goes then, and indeed does move up, but only to 10th. He's swapped around with Panis and Frentzen. Heidfeld then just breaks into the 1:12s. Coulthard will have to get on with it. He's got 2 minutes though. He's got enough time to get around, but he'll have to push that out lap a little bit. It's going to be interesting to watch Raikkonen as well out there now. He's had a difficult weekend. He's got 1 run left. Let's see how calm Raikkonen's head is, and if he'll pull a hot lap out of the bag without making a mistake, without locking a brake somewhere. Raikkonen then really on test, I think, to see if he can pull his weekend together.
We've seen some amazing performances from Kimi Raikkonen. Who can forget at Spa the way he's kept his foot on the throttle through that huge cloud of smoke at Eau Rouge. He says his commitment's not been questioned, but as you say, Martin, now he's under pressure. He really has got to dig deep and find something special. And another problem he's going to have is that there are 13 other cars out on the racetrack at the moment, of which one is the Ferrari of Rubens Barrichello, currently in 2nd place. A reasonably tidy start, I would think, to that.
Looked all right, didn't it? It's 21 and a bit seconds, this first sector. And we've suddenly flicked to the other Ferrari, so we're Michael Schumacher versus Michael Schumacher. Sorry, and then back to Barrichello. Schumacher is out there. I'm sure we have been flicking from onboard to outboard. And let's have a look as we go down then to turn 8. Hook up the inside there, Michael. He does give the exit of the corner plenty of space, so that was absolutely fine. I believe we're on board Michael Schumacher. Every time we flick away, we're looking at Barrichello, but this is indeed Michael Schumacher. Back to Barrichello. Somebody's got their lines crossed up here, because yes, indeed, we're back with Michael then through that last corner. And this has been his best middle sector. So as he comes over the line, he could slightly improve. Let's have a look. Michael Schumacher fails to improve, a fraction slow, and Barrichello also fails to improve just behind him.
Yeah, Barrichello 3/10 slower than he was before. You saw the margin for Michael Schumacher, and he lost the time in the first sector. We didn't see why, but it was a couple of tenths slower than he'd gone before. Everything else was pretty tidy. Juan Montoya, though, comes through. This is going to be his last chance. He's not improved in either of the first 2 sectors, so really little chance of him getting ahead of Rubens Barrichello unless he's had an extraordinary time in the final sector. Indeed, he hasn't, so he will stay 3rd. And Ralf Schumacher has improved.
Yes, but Ralf Schumacher has actually taken 5th away from Raikkonen. Raikkonen failed to improve. Coulthard could be just about to improve. He may take 3rd away from Montoya. The session is over. The checkered flag is waving. David Coulthard drives for the line with all the lights showing, and indeed does go up into 3rd place.
Fantastic lap at the very last moments of the session from David Coulthard. Nobody else seemed to be finding any speed, but he thought about it, worked on it, and found a terrific lap, and that really is a shot in the arm for David Coulthard. He's put a lot of space between himself and Kimi Raikkonen on the grid, his teammate. Raikkonen down in 6th, Coulthard comfortably on the inside of row 2. But talk about comfortable, these boys, they've been leaning back in their chairs all afternoon. Ferrari 1-2 on the grid, and even the 2nd place Ferrari has a 4/10 margin over 3rd place David Coulthard.
Yes, it was really a fight then, wasn't it? We kind of thought it was going to be a scarlet front row, or we kind of knew it was going to be a scarlet front row. It was then a question of would it be Williams or McLaren leading the chase, and an important lap there for Coulthard.